Diplomatic attaché Kavith Sorn arrived on Earth on the 12th day of the Havith Empire's 90-day ultimatum, and she expected, stepping off the transit shuttle at the planetary hub's arrivals concourse, to find a world that looked like what it was. A species with 78 days remaining before the most powerful military force in this sector arrived to enforce a demand it had not yet received a response to. She had conducted diplomatic assessments in 11 crisis situations across her career, and she knew what a crisis looked like from the inside. The particular tempo of it, the compressed, slightly airless quality of decision-making under existential pressure, the way public spaces carried a background anxiety that was not quite visible, but was completely audible to anyone who had spent enough time in enough difficult situations to recognize the frequency. She stepped into the arrivals concourse and stopped. The concourse was operating on its standard schedule. Not a modified schedule, not an emergency configuration, not the reduced, essential services-only operation pattern that every crisis-affected infrastructure she had ever assessed ran on. Standard schedule. The departure boards showed normal volumes. The food vendors were open. A group of children near the central plaza were chasing each other around a sculpture in the particular single-minded way of children who had been sitting still for several hours and had just been given permission to stop. She pulled up the local information feed on her diplomatic terminal and scanned the headline items. The Havith Empire's 90-day ultimatum was not the lead story. It was the fourth item, below a piece about coastal weather patterns and an article about a new medical research finding, and a brief notice about a music performance scheduled for the following month. She read the headline for the fourth item twice. Havith Ultimatum Government Releases Statement, Legal Review Ongoing. She stood in the arrivals concourse for a long moment, and she experienced a quality she had not encountered in 11 prior crisis assessments, which was the specific disorientation of an analyst whose preparation had been accurate and whose observations were not matching it. Her assigned liaison met her at the concourse exit, a tall human in his 50s with the unhurried professionalism of someone who did this work regularly and had stopped performing it. His name was Dr. James Ockhaffer, listed in her briefing as a senior coordinator with Earth's Diplomatic Relations Office, and he greeted her with the particular warmth of someone who was genuinely pleased to meet her, and also clearly had several things he was thinking about that had nothing to do with the meeting. Attaché Sorn, he shook her hand, the human greeting gesture. Welcome, how was the transit? The transit was standard, she said. Dr. Ockhaffer, I need to establish something immediately before we move to the formal briefing schedule. I have spent the last 12 days preparing for this assessment based on standard crisis response indicators. I expected to arrive in a situation that demonstrated visible emergency protocols. I did not. I need to understand why. Ockhaffer looked at her for a moment with the particular quality of someone who has heard a question and is deciding whether to answer the question that was asked or the question underneath it. Can I ask you something first? He said. Go ahead. What did you expect it to look like? She held his gaze for a moment. Emergency resource reallocation, visible military posturing, public communication channels leading with the crisis, the compressed, accelerated quality of a government managing an existential threat on a public timeline. He picked up her transit case and began walking toward the exit, and she fell into step beside him with the slight adjustment of someone recalibrating their expectation of a conversation's direction. We have some of that, he said, just not the parts that are visible from the outside. He pushed the exit door open with one shoulder, the unconscious ease of someone who had used this door many times. Have you eaten? The transit food is usually poor, and I know a place near the briefing facility that does a reasonable lunch. I have not eaten, she said, and I want to understand what I am observing. Good, he said. Both of those things are available at the same time. He took her to a small restaurant 3 blocks from the diplomatic briefing facility, An unremarkable room with outdoor seating that looked onto a street of the particular pleasant, lively ordinariness of a city not on a war footing. And she sat across from him and asked the question she had been building since the arrival's concourse. "The population knows about the ultimatum," she said. "I confirmed this before departure. It was a public announcement. 78 days from today, the Haveth Empire expects Earth's formal surrender. The population knows. They do. And I am sitting in a restaurant that is running its normal lunch service, looking at a street that is operating normally, reviewing a local information feed that covered the ultimatum below a weather report." She set her terminal down. "I need you to help me understand what I am observing. I came here to document a crisis response. I am not observing a crisis response." Akafar looked at the street for a moment, his coffee cup held loosely in both hands, and she had the impression of a man who was not avoiding the question, but was choosing the version of the answer that would actually communicate what he wanted to communicate. "What does a crisis look like where you're from?" he said. "I have already described it. Right, reallocation, mobilization, emergency measures." He set the cup down. "Can I ask you something else?" "Go ahead." "If someone told you that you had 90 days," he said, and he said it with a careful evenness that told her he had thought about how to phrase this. "Not 90 days before you died, just 90 days before something large and uncertain arrived, what would you do with them?" She did not answer immediately. "Most people," Akafar said, "when they actually sit with that question don't say mobilize. They say, finish the thing I've been working on. Call the person I've been meaning to call. Take the trip I've been putting off. Have the conversation I've been avoiding." He looked at her. "We've been given 90 days. We're using them." "Using them for what?" He smiled, not the performed warmth of a diplomat managing an impression, but the quieter, more specific warmth of someone who is glad to have a question that has a real answer. "Come back on day 47, he said. "I'll show you something." She stayed. The assignment had always been 60 days on the ground, and she had the facility and the access and the official standing, and she settled into the work of observing with the methodical attention that 11 years of diplomatic assessment had built into her professional character. In the first 2 weeks she looked, carefully and systematically, for the indicators she had been trained to find. They were there, some of them. The government's legal review was visible in the public record if you knew where to look. A team of treaty specialists working through the Haveth Ultimatum's formal language against the Concord's procedural requirements, with the focused, unhurried thoroughness of lawyers who understood that the document they were building would need to be airtight when it mattered. The military's readiness indicators moved slightly, the standard precautionary adjustment of a defense establishment acknowledging a threat on the horizon without panicking at it. Supply chain adjustments, quiet, practical, the kind that looked like standard inventory management rather than emergency stockpiling, because they were, in fact, standard inventory management applied with slightly more attention than usual. The machinery of a serious government taking a serious threat seriously, all of it present, none of it visible in the way she had expected visible to look. What she noticed instead, slowly at first and then with increasing frequency, was something else entirely. She noticed it first at the research center she visited on day 19, a coastal science facility whose work on oceanic erosion mapping was, her briefing notes indicated, unrelated to any defense or crisis preparation function. She was there to speak with the facility director about Earth's broader scientific cooperation arrangements with Concord members, a standard diplomatic inquiry that formed part of her assessment's background research. The director was not available. She was in her lab working. The facility administrator who met Caveth instead explained, with the mild apology of someone conveying information rather than an excuse, that Dr. Adiz Nwasu had been working through most of the last 2 weeks on the final analysis stage of a study she had been conducting for 6 years, and was at the point in the work where interruption was genuinely costly. Her study on coastal erosion patterns, Cavith said, looking at the briefing note. Yes, she says she can finish it in about 3 more weeks if she stays focused. The administrator glanced toward the lab corridor. She's been in there since 600. She'll probably be there until midnight. Cavith looked at the corridor. Is this related to the current situation? She said. The administrator looked at her with the mild confusion of someone who had not immediately understood the connection she was suggesting. She's been working on this study for 6 years, the administrator said. She started it 2 years before the Havath situation was even a diplomatic concern. She's finishing it because it's ready to be finished. A pause. I suppose the timing is good, though. She said something yesterday about being glad she had the time to do it right. Cavith noted the detail and moved to her next appointment. She noted the next one 3 days later, a secondary school on the city's northern edge, where she was observing a standard educational facility as part of a broader assessment of Earth's civilian infrastructure. The school's curriculum coordinator, a woman named Ms. Sarah Reeves, was in her office with what appeared to be 3 years of accumulated notes spread across every available surface, organizing them with the focused intensity of someone doing something they had been meaning to do for longer than was comfortable to admit. I've been building this curriculum since I came to this school, Ms. Reeves said, when Cavith asked what she was working on, without self-consciousness or drama, simply describing an ongoing project. Third-year science sequence. I finally have all the pieces right, I think. I want to get the complete version to the department head this week so she has it before the semester planning starts. Is there a specific reason for the urgency? Cavith said. Ms. Reeves looked at her with the particular look of someone who has noticed a question, contains an assumption they don't quite share. Not urgency, she said. It's just ready. I've been meaning to finish it and now I have time to finish it properly. Cavith wrote it in her observation log that evening. Second instance of a human using the phrase finishing something that was already in progress, in a context unconnected to the current crisis, described with a quality that was not urgency, but was also not casualness. Something in between those two things for which she did not have the precise word yet. On day 31, she saw the father and daughter. She was walking the harbor front, her standard early morning route on days without scheduled appointments, and they were on a small sailing vessel in the harbor, the father standing behind the daughter with his hands over hers on the tiller, talking to her in the quiet, patient way of someone transmitting something specific and important. The daughter was perhaps 10 years old. She was watching the water with the focused attention of a child who understands that she is being taught something real. Cavith stopped on the harborfront path and watched them for several minutes, the particular stillness of an observer who has recognized that they are seeing something but does not yet know precisely what. The wind shifted. The father said something. The daughter adjusted the tiller slightly, and the small vessel responded, and she felt the response through the tiller, and she looked up at her father with an expression that did not need any translation across species or cultures. Cavith wrote it in her log that evening, a father teaching his daughter to read the wind, unhurried, as if the morning was exactly the right size for the thing being done in it. She met Akaffer for the appointment he had offered her on day 47, and he took her to a small room in a university building, where a woman was sitting at a terminal with the particular, still quality of someone who has just completed something and has not yet stood up. Dr. Nwasu, he said from the doorway. The woman turned. She was in her mid-40s, with the specific, quiet exhaustion of someone who had worked very hard for several weeks and was now on the other side of it. This is the submission I mentioned, Akaffer said to Cavith. She sent it at 3:40 this morning. The coastal erosion study, Cavith said. Dr. Nwasu looked at her with mild surprise at the recognition. Yes. You have been working on it for 6 years. 6 years and about 2 weeks, she said. The last bit took longer than I wanted it to, but it's done. Kavith looked at her for a moment. How do you feel? She said. It was not the kind of question she typically asked during a diplomatic assessment. She asked it anyway. Dr. Nwasu considered it seriously, which Kavith appreciated. The consideration of someone who understood the question was genuine. Finished, she said. Not relieved, finished. There's a difference. She paused. Relieved implies you were worried it wouldn't get done. I knew it would get done. I just needed the time to do it right. She turned back to the terminal. I'm going to spend the next few days going over the references before I start the next project. Akafar caught Kavith's eye as they left. The brief, significant glance of someone confirming that what she had just witnessed was what he had promised she would see. She had seen it. She was not yet sure she understood it. On day 53, she sat in the back of a staff meeting at a secondary school and watched Ms. Sarah Reeves hand a document to the department head, with the quiet satisfaction of a person completing a debt they had owed themselves for 3 years. On day 61, she stood at the back of a rehearsal studio and watched a musician named Elara Chen deliver a handwritten orchestral score to the conductor of a small ensemble. 4 years of calm. Position now finished, the conductor holding it with both hands and looking at the title page for a long moment before he looked up. On day 68, she sat in the audience for the premiere performance of that composition, in a hall that was perhaps 200 people, and she listened to music that had taken 4 years to write, and she watched Elara Chen in the third row, watching the ensemble, and she understood something about the expression on Chen's face that she did not have the word for, but that she recognized, because she had seen it now in several different forms across several different humans across several different weeks. The expression of a person who has used their time correctly. On day 78, following a lead from Akafar that she had at first dismissed as too small to be worth a dedicated visit, she sat across from an elderly man named George Adami in a small apartment and watched him address an envelope with the careful handwriting of someone for whom the act of handwriting itself was a form of respect for the recipient. He had been writing letters for 11 days. I've been meaning to write to these people for years, he said, without embarrassment, the particular freedom of a man in his 80s from the need to justify what he was doing with his time. My old colleagues from the university, my daughter's former teacher, the one who was particularly kind to her, a few people I knew when I was young whom I've thought about more than they know. He sealed the envelope and placed it on the stack. 43 letters. I'll post them this afternoon. Why now? She said. He looked at her with the patient attention of someone who has been old long enough to know which questions deserve their full answer. Because now I have the time, he said, and because I finally understand that having the time and using it are two different decisions. She called Akafar that evening from her apartment at the diplomatic facility, and she asked the question she had been building toward since day 19. What is happening here? She said. I need you to say it plainly, because I have spent 30 days observing it and I have a clear picture, and I do not have the words for the picture. Akafar was quiet for a moment, the thinking quiet rather than the evasive kind. We're not a monolith, he said. Some people are frightened. Some people are angry. The government has people working the legal case around the clock. The defense establishment is at readiness. All of that is real. I know, I have documented all of it. But also, he said, also, a researcher finished a 6-year study. A teacher finished a curriculum. A man is mailing letters he has been meaning to send for decades. A father taught his daughter to sail. A musician finished a score. He paused. Those things are also happening, at the same time, without contradiction. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I think I understand what you are describing, she said. I do not yet understand why. Because 90 days is a lot of time, he said. If you use it, people who have spent their lives waiting for the right moment to finish the thing they've been working on, or have the conversation they've been avoiding, or teach their kid the thing they've been meaning to teach. Look at 90 days and see something specific. What do they see? Enough, he said. They see enough time if they use it correctly. A pause. We were told we had 90 days. A lot of us heard that and thought, 90 days is enough to finish what I've been meaning to finish. Not because we're dying, because the time is there and the things need finishing, and that's what time is for. Kavith sat with that for a long moment. And the people who are frightened, she said. They're finishing things too, he said. Fear and finishing aren't mutually exclusive. The fear is real. The finishing is also real. Both things at the same time. He paused again. I told you day 47. I should have told you it was going to keep going the whole way through. She filed her day 60 interim report to the Empire's Diplomatic Assessment Division from the facility's secure channel. And she wrote it with the careful precision of a diplomat who understood that the report she was filing would be read by people whose response to its findings would determine what happened next. She wrote, Earth is not invisible crisis. This assessment needs to be understood precisely. Earth is not ignoring the ultimatum. The government's legal and defense responses are active, competent, and ongoing. What is absent is the visible social and psychological architecture of a people experiencing existential terror. The population appears to have received the 90-day timeline and made a collective, distributed, entirely uncoordinated decision about how to use it. They are using it. The using looks, from the outside, like normalcy. It is not normalcy. It is something I am having significant difficulty categorizing under a NY standard threat assessment framework I have been trained to apply. She paused for a long time before the report's recommendation section. She wrote, I recommend extending my assessment through day 91, if resources permit. I believe the most significant finding of this assessment will not be visible until the ultimatum expires, and I can observe what Earth presents on the other side of the 90 days. What I am watching appears to be a preparation, but it is not a preparation I recognize from any prior assessment, and I want to document what it produces before I attempt to characterize what it was. The Empire's Diplomatic Assessment Division approved the extension in 3 hours, which told her they found the interim report as difficult to categorize as she did. She found Akafer on day 89 in a small park near the diplomatic facility, eating lunch with the unhurried quality of a man who had allocated exactly enough time for the park and the lunch, and was using both correctly. She sat beside him without asking. 2 days, she said. 2 days, he agreed. I want to ask you something I have not asked before, because I was not sure I was ready to hear the answer, she said. What happens on day 91? He looked at the park for a moment. The trees and the people and the ordinary afternoon happening in every direction. On day 91, he said, our legal team files a comprehensive Concord procedural challenge to the ultimatum's validity. They've been building it for 89 days. It's thorough. Our treaty lawyers believe it holds. He paused. The ultimatum has procedural deficiencies under Concord law. Formal surrender demands require specific filing protocols that the Haveth ultimatum did not follow. Earth doesn't accept ultimatums that aren't valid, so we're not surrendering to one. The legal challenge was always the response. The legal challenge was always the mechanism, he said. The response is everything that happened in the 90 days. She looked at him. The completions, she said. It was the first time she had used the word she had settled on privately, 11 days earlier, and she found that saying it aloud confirmed it was the right one. He looked at her with the expression she had come to associate with him, the specific warmth of someone recognizing that a genuine understanding had arrived. The completions, he said. She looked at the park. I came here to document a crisis response, she said. I am going to leave having documented something I do not have a word for in my own language. What's the closest word? She considered it. We have a word, she said, for the quality of a thing that has been completed with full attention and full care. Not quickly, not slowly, correctly, with the amount of attention the thing deserved. She paused. We use it for objects usually, a well-made tool, a well-built structure, not for the behavior of an entire population. Maybe it should be used that way, Akafor said. She did not answer that. She sat in the park for the rest of the lunch hour, and she watched the ordinary afternoon, and she thought about a researcher finishing a study, and a teacher finishing a curriculum, and a father teaching his daughter to read the wind, and a musician delivering 4 years of work to the hands that would perform it, and an old man mailing 43 letters. She thought about all of it happening at the same time, across 89 days, in the same world that had a legal team building a conquered challenge that would invalidate an ultimatum, and a defense establishment at readiness, and a government managing a genuine and serious threat. All of it at the same time, without contradiction, because 90 days was enough time if you used it correctly. On day 91, at 900, Earth's diplomatic office filed a formal conquered procedural challenge to the Haveth Empire's ultimatum, reference number 7719D, citing 17 specific procedural deficiencies in the ultimatum's conquered compliance, each one documented with the precision of 89 days of uninterrupted legal work. Cavith read the filing from her terminal in the diplomatic facility, and she read it twice, with the careful attention she had given every document in this assessment. It was thorough. It was precise. It was the kind of legal work that did not look like it had been produced under pressure because it had not been produced under pressure. It had been produced with exactly the amount of time it needed and with exactly the attention it deserved, because the people who built it had been given 90 days and they had used them. The Concord's Procedural Review Office acknowledged receipt at 1100 and flagged the challenge for formal review, which meant the ultimatum was suspended pending that review, which meant Earth had not surrendered, and the Empire had no legal standing to act until the review concluded. The review, Cavith knew from the legal framework she had studied, would take between 6 and 18 months. Earth had 90 days. They used all of them. She filed her final assessment report on day 93, 2 days after her scheduled departure, because she had needed those 2 days to find the words for the thing she had spent 60 days watching. The formal sections she wrote with the clean, comprehensive precision the Empire's assessment standards required, the legal challenge's viability, the defense establishment's readiness, the government's procedural strategy, the projected timeline for the Concord review, all of it accurate, detailed, fully documented. The final section, which the Empire's format listed as optional and which she had never, in 11 prior assessments, used for anything beyond a single summary paragraph, she wrote at length. She wrote, "I was sent to Earth to assess a crisis response. I did not find a crisis response. I found something that required 60 days of direct observation before I had adequate language for it, and I want to record what I found as precisely as I can, because I believe it is the most significant finding of this assessment, and I do not want the significance lost in the formal report's earlier sections." She wrote, "A researcher completed a 6-year study. A teacher finished a curriculum she had been building for 3 years. A father taught his daughter to read the wind. A musician delivered a 4-year composition to the people who would perform it. An old man mailed 43 letters he had been meaning to send for years." She wrote, "None of these people were performing courage. None of them made public declarations about what they were doing or why. They used the 90 days, not in defiance, not in resignation, because the time was there and the things needed finishing, and finishing them was the right use of the time." She paused. She wrote, "I have a word for this in my assessment notes. I have been using it since day 78. The word is completion, not as a description of the individual acts, though each one was a completion, as a description of the collective quality of what I observed. Earth received 90 days. They used all of them, not in the direction of the threat, in the direction of what mattered. The legal team addressed the threat. The population addressed what mattered. Both things at the same time, without contradiction, across 90 days that were exactly enough time if you used them correctly. She wrote, I recommend the Empire's leadership read this section carefully before determining any further response to the Concord's procedural review, because I want them to understand what they are dealing with. Not a people in crisis, not a people paralyzed, a people who received a timeline and understood without being told what the timeline was for. She closed the report. She sat for a moment at the terminal, in the quiet of the diplomatic facility on a morning that was entirely ordinary, and she thought about Akafar's question from day 12, the one he had asked her in a restaurant while the street outside operated at its normal tempo. What did you expect it to look like? She had not had an answer then. She had one now. She had expected it to look like fear. It had looked like a researcher finishing her work, a teacher completing her curriculum, a father on the water with his daughter on a morning that was right for it, a musician in the third row of a small hall, watching 4 years of composition performed correctly for the first time, an old man addressing an envelope with the care of someone who understood that the act of attention was itself a form of love. She had expected fear. She had found something she had not, before this assignment, known how to look for. The quiet, unhurried, unglamorous, entirely dignified practice of a people, using the time they had been given correctly. All 90 days of it. Not because they were unafraid, not because they were certain, because the time was there and the things needed finishing, and finishing them was the right answer to the question that 90 days was asking. She wrote one final line in her personal log, not the formal report, the private one that would remain with her rather than travel to the Empire's assessment archives. She wrote, I came here to document fear. I documented dignity. I did not know before this assignment that those were different things. I know now. If this one reached somewhere the others did not, it's in the 43 letters. Not the legal challenge, elegant as it was. Not the defense readiness, necessary as it was. A man in his 80s addressing envelopes with careful handwriting, sending letters to people he had been meaning to write to for years, not because he was dying, not as a farewell, but because he finally understood that having the time and using it were two different decisions, and he intended to make both of them. Earth used all 90 days, not in the direction of the threat, in the direction of what mattered. The legal team addressed the threat. The rest of the population addressed what mattered, both at the same time without contradiction, because 90 days is enough time to finish what needs finishing if you understand what the time is actually for. Kavith Sorn came to Earth to document a crisis. She stayed 60 days and documented something she didn't have a word for in her own language. She has one now. Stay human.